Welcome to the Past Precedent. It's the 28th century BCE and Gilgamesh rules Uruk. What's the date specifically? Well, according to Andrew George, the eminent authority on the Epic of Gilgamesh, he believes he ruled around 2750 BCE, so perfect for this century. And for our purposes of building an effective timeline, if you plug in Gilgamesh rules Uruk, 28th century BCE, you'll have your fifth date. If King Gilgamesh is familiar, you've probably heard of him from the oldest known literary epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'll discuss that story in a bit. But that literary epic is based off of a king that is believed to have actually ruled. So what do we know about him and how do we know? Well, first, outside the epic poem, he appears on a few inscriptions, a couple more poems, and on the Sumerian kings list as the fifth ruler of the city of Uruk. If you remember from my last video, some kings on the list have absurdly long reigns, and it's said that Gilgamesh ruled for 126 years. Of course, they don't believe he ruled for that long, but what seems consistent and within the realm of possibility is that he had a long reign, he ruled the city of Uruk, he was a relentless and impetuous warrior king that despite some battle defeats and going against the advice of his council, he conquered 3 neighboring cities. He was the first to bring cedar wood to the city of Uruk, and he built the wall around the city, which is seen both as an accomplishment and a project of a tyrant who exploited the labor of his people. He just seems to be a king that wanted it all. The throne, his neighbors' thrones, loyal companions, grand accomplishments, and immortality. As Professor Bauer put it, he had almost a superhuman vitality, the kind of man who founds and sells 4 companies before the age of 28. This vitality wears on his people to a frazzle, and they are exhausted by his constant bounding. And after his reign, but a century or 2 before writing could capture any and all thought, historians believe that Gilgamesh was deified, worshipped in a cult. Then around 2500 BCE, once writing was fully developed, he was one of the first subjects in the history of literature, and he began to take on this mythic character, similar to what we see in Odysseus and King Arthur. The oldest copies of the Sumerian Gilgamesh poems that we actually have are from around 2100 BCE, during what historians have dubbed the Sumerian Renaissance. These Gilgamesh poems slowly evolved and transformed into the epic that we know today by being rewritten, revised, and preserved in ancient libraries up into the end of the first millennium BCE. At that point, Gilgamesh was buried in history until George Smith began to decipher the ancient cuneiform texts at the end of the 19th century. And today, Assyriologists like Andrew George continue to sift through these texts to give us new insight about Gilgamesh, as well as the ancient Mesopotamians, and they still have a lot to go through. To put that into perspective, archaeologists have recovered about 500,000 cuneiform texts, but have only deciphered about 50,000 of them. So there's a lot of information to be rediscovered, and I'm jealous of what historians a few hundred years from now will know about the ancient Near East. If only Gilgamesh could have found that secret to immortality. Like with the Great Flood story in my last video, historians are trying to separate history from myth by looking at the evidence and assessing its historicity. Most historians would agree that Gilgamesh was probably a Sumerian king, and he probably was a relentless, impetuous tyrant who probably did some extraordinary things like build the wall around Uruk. So when it comes to historical facts about Gilgamesh, probably is the best answer we're going to get. And Gilgamesh is important to history for his reign, but he's more important for being the subject of the oldest surviving piece of literature in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So let's take a closer look at it. As of 2016, there are 226 separate cuneiform sources that scholars use to reconstruct the different versions of the story. And they are found all over Mesopotamia and Anatolia, dating as far back as 2100 BCE. But some historians believe that the first Gilgamesh stories were written a few centuries earlier. The most famous version, the standard version, the one that was first found by George Smith, and the one that I know the best, was found buried in the Library of Nineveh, and is believed to have been written around 1200 BCE. The library was destroyed in the 7th century BCE when the Assyrian Empire was defeated. At that point, this epic poem was buried in history for 2,500 years. And the poem is divided up into 6 segments. First, Enkidu confronts Gilgamesh. They fight, they become friends, then they engage in 2 main adventures. First, they kill Humbaba in the cedar forest, then they kill the Bull of Heaven. This upsets the gods and they punish both of them by killing Enkidu, and Gilgamesh deeply mourns his death. Then Gilgamesh goes on a quest for immortality by searching for Utnapishtim. This Noah figure, Utnapishtim, recounts his unique story of surviving the Great Flood and being granted immortality by the gods, which Gilgamesh discovers he can never achieve. As a consolation prize, Utnapishtim tells him where to find the Plant of Youth. Gilgamesh finds it, but it's stolen by a snake. Finally, Gilgamesh returns home, a wiser and more humble mortal. That's the plot in a nutshell, and for my purposes here, I want to highlight what scholars have actually learned from it. As you probably know, all literature has its cultural, historical, and philosophical fingerprints all over it. So what can we discover from this epic? I've already highlighted what historians believe to be true about Gilgamesh, but here's some other accomplishments attributed to him in the story, but are less likely to be true. He's believed to be the first to dig oases in the desert, the first to cut down the cedar trees on Mount Lebanon, the first to discover techniques for killing wild bulls, the first to sail an ocean-going craft, and the first to dive for coral. And this is perceived to be the more mythical, larger-than-life Gilgamesh that probably permeated throughout the culture of the time, similar to what Americans might think of George Washington and the cherry tree, where he is believed to have said, "I can't tell a lie, Pa. You know I can't tell a lie. I did cut it with my hatchet." And yes, that's exactly what George Washington sounded like according to this book, Convenient Facts I made up for this video. As for Mesopotamian culture itself, the story explains how the gods sought to destroy mankind through the Great Flood, and how Gilgamesh's journey to find Utnapishtim gave Gilgamesh the wisdom to restore their temples and their rituals to their ideal state. It also explains the gloomy realm of the dead for all people, not just sinners, why temples take in orphans, how there came to be 2 New Year's days in the Babylonian calendar, how the Levantine Rift Valley was riven, how dwarfs came to be, why nomads live in tents, why some prostitutes eke out a living while others enjoy a life of attentive luxury, why doves and swallows cleave to human company but ravens don't, and why snakes shed their skin. It's hard to say to what degree any of this was believed by the ancient Mesopotamians, but it probably abounded enough that most people of the time were at least aware of these perceptions. As for major themes that hit at the root of the human condition, experts like Andrew George say the story has several, such as the fear of death and the search for immortality, a path to wisdom through successes and failures, what is a good king, the responsibility of family, the eternal conflict of nature and nurture, the benefits of civilization over savagery, the rewards of friendship, and the nobility of the heroic enterprise. There's no doubt that this poem evokes those themes, but without any commentary from those authors that created it, it's hard to tell if that's what the authors intended, or if it's only what modern scholars are extracting. But hey, it's literature, it's art, so the reader's opinion can be different and just as insightful as the author's intention. So go read it and tell me your thoughts in the comments. It's not that long. I recommend this book. Not only does it give you the standard version that most people reference, but other versions as well. And each version is placed in its historical and archaeological context, along with a ton of commentary by Andrew George himself. It's a great way to start building a cultural foundation for both the ancient Near East and Western civilization. So that's it, our 5th date, 28th century BCE, Gilgamesh rules Uruk. Only 48 dates to go. If you have any questions or know a lot already, in the comment section, please post anything you think is essential to understanding this century or this topic. If you're adding new information, please cite your sources. I'll be monitoring what's going on, and in my conclusion videos for this project, I'll highlight how we've expanded its historiography and list any questions that seem to be left unanswered. At that point, we'll have a stronger foundation for my next project and all future projects. And of course, if you're an expert and you want to share your knowledge to help guide us, please feel free to join the conversation. Or if you're interested, I'd love to interview you and post it right here. So contact me. If you just found me for the first time and are curious what this is all about, go check out my intro videos to both this project and this channel. And as always, subscribe, like, donate some money to keep this show going, click the notification so you know when the next video is up, and I'll see you then.